Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to my overview of Scramble, Battle of Britain. So for those not across it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game. That's the Steam refund window. Steam says you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time, and generally speaking, I agree. And would say 20 hours in, you're probably not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short, punchy video, broad strokes info, keep it around 10 minutes, and you can make up your mind on your own. So this is an odd little game. Firstly, I like what they're doing here. And at first blush, it had me intrigued, but then with hands-on, it really got my attention. Mechanically, it's very sound. I suppose you can sort of divine it by looking at the footage, but it is a like I go, you go, turn-based sort of thing, which you get crop up from time to time. One of my more favorite ones, I suppose, would be like the Battlestar Galactica game, Deadlock. I think there's a problem, as always, with this particular genre, is that battles can really blow out and take a long time, and you've got to be careful there. It will push the gameplay loop right up to the edge. Probably one of my main complaints about Deadlock is, not to talk about that too much, but you're incentivized to build a humongous fleet, and kind of the bigger your fleet gets and the more epic it gets, the more tedious the game can get when battles run on for like an hour and a half of just micromanaging everything. So far, at least what I've played of this, it's a little bit smaller scale. You're only really controlling 3 Spitfires at any given time, but who's to say where it goes in, full release? This at the moment is early access, and it's almost a term of disparagement, but it's probably a little bit more accurate here. It does feel very tech demo-y. However, a very solid and promising tech, dare I say one you might want to invest in, to take the analogy too far. So yeah, very clean, tight refinement of the I go, you go sort of turn-based methodology. You can do some sort of like random skirmish dogfight sort of thing, but as far as like a campaign, an actual core progression, or just general gameplay loop other than the fundamental mechanical components, there's not much there. You can do this sort of squadron mode where you kind of have to hold out for X days of running sorties. You've got a roster of dudes, and so it's got a little bit of investment there, but it is very bare bones. But yeah, I know I'm harping on that, but usually they go hand in hand, to be honest. If you've got a bare bones early access product, it's usually a bit sloppy. And what I'm sort of trying to impress upon you is that the loop here is really fun and really addicting, and the time that I spent with it flew by. However, there will be a point where you go, right, I need more. And the more isn't there yet. So at the very least, keep an eye on it, maybe a wish list to follow, that sort of thing. So those negatives notwithstanding, let's talk about what's there and how it's quite awesome. There is a kind of arcadiness to the controls which make it accessible, but arcadey in the sense of, this is probably something a bit more hardcore turn-based strategy type stuff, but mainstreamified, console-ified. Looks like this would run really well with thumbsticks actually, which you would not assume dealing with this sort of turn-based method, and especially in 3-dimensional space. But the magic of it is that you essentially just have 2 axes to steer the plane on, and that in turn will translate in 3-dimensional movement. So you've got left to right, which is just called left to right, and I believe it's sort of like dive and climb. I can't remember off the top of my head. So you've basically got an XY axis that is just relative to the fuselage across wingspan. And so broadly speaking, all you really do for each of these planes is you swing left and right, and you swing up and down. And that mixed in with, the current speed of the plane and the maneuvers that you're sort of starting to pull, it translates really well. It's actually probably one of the most elegant ways that I've seen handling 3D space control in general, let alone with kind of thumbstick, more accessible controls in mind. You kind of use WASD, to be honest. You don't really use the mouse other than to manipulate the camera. So totally alien, totally unusual, incredibly intuitive, which is wild to see. So as you can see, you'll have your plane going along a projected path. That'll be where it is, and the ghost as well, and they have the same for the enemy. However, the enemy do their own things as well, so you can predict their path to a point, but that ghost is just a sort of best fit, and I've often seen them pull all sorts of maneuvers that I wasn't anticipating, which is cool. It keeps you guessing. And then you mix in the sort of human pilot element. Your pilots seem to have like stat lines, and I've had some dudes that were absolute banger aces with very high like stamina, and I had another dude who was very rookie, and it didn't take very much for the G's forces to kind of black him out. So I'm sure that'll probably be established and elaborated on further in the, you know, later releases and patches, but it's cool that it's got that element because a lot of it is very much feasible in-game statistics that are relevant, which can be a problem with RPGs, you know, plus 1% in lightning resistance, whatever, you know, it becomes window dressing as opposed to core mechanics. But when you're maneuvering your little flight line around, you will see little visual indicators. It's all very clever. As someone who's big on UI, and I come down hard on bad UI, this is incredible feedback. So you'll see like little black dots along the sides, and that's essentially when they're starting to pull a G tolerance that's kind of too much for them. You're risking blacking them out. If the black lines go straight, they will black out. I think there might be like a random amount in there. Like, I haven't quite conquered the system. I've only had so much time. And to be honest, I was pretty engrossed in just trying to shoot down Messerschmitts. So that kept me kind of occupied, but also kind of good news. If you're so sucked into the moment to moment that you're not thinking about peripheral stuff, that's always good. But they seem to have stamina bars, which I think they can kind of regen and heal if you take it easy. Who's taking it easy in these dogfights though? But yeah, if you rip them around too much and they pull too hard a G-force, and then because the turns go in like little couple second segments, you might pull a dude into a tight turn, and consider that first part of the turn, I'm using my hands a lot, will be wider, and as he sort of cuts in. And then maybe the second one you go tight again, and it will tighten as you pull into it. Never mind that, you know, their airspeed will be dropping off as well. But my point is you can potentially paint yourself into a situation where you turn in a ridiculously tight turn, and it's hard to get out of that G-force that you've put on the poor bloke. And if they black out, you essentially don't get their turn while their plane does whatever it's gonna do. And this could result in them waking up after a turn, and this might be more stat driven. Again, not super clear, but I've had guys black out for multiple turns, and I think it might just be because they were pulling so many Gs when they blacked out, and the plane is still sort of leveling out, or it's stuck in that spin, and they can go into the drink, absolutely, if they don't get shot to bits. So it's really cool, that sort of risk reward, that you have that visual feedback. You've also got little character stats down the bottom left with this stamina bar, and it sort of shows you their tolerance for pulling too hard a G-force, so they can, you know, they lose stamina to make up for it. It's almost like spending stamina or mana or whatever. And that's how you can sort of dig deep to try and outmaneuver the enemy. And once it sort of has a prediction that it's gonna line up with the dudes, you know, that you're flying at, you'll see sort of like yellow indicators on your flight path, and at that point, you give them the green light to pull the trigger on the gun, and they'll just shoot anything in front. There is ammo, and you seem to go through it a bit because, you know, this is not exactly a super exact science, so I'm getting better at the dogfighting, but there is definitely a skill to the chaos. And, you know, like I said, even though I feel that there's not really a lot of game here other than just being impressed with really fun mechanics, what's there, you know, randomly generating sorties and flying out was thrilling because, you know, at first one I think I was in a 3v3. The second one I was up against bloody 8, I think, planes. And that was really cool. And one of my dudes was the rookie, so we sort of had to babysit him. Like, he couldn't really maneuver himself out, and he'd have a couple of bogeys on his tail, and it was pretty crazy. I actually came out on top and won that one. I think I still had one dude left and they had none. But yeah, it's actually fascinating. I would recommend checking it out if you find this sort of intriguing. But again, I didn't give it too much thought going into it. I thought, oh, okay, I like these sort of games. I do. I enjoy these kind of turn-based strategic things, and I'm more fascinated by the sort of World War II setting of fighter planes. Like, that's what got me through the door, but I wasn't expecting it to control so incredibly well. So yeah, not strictly a pleasant surprise, but a very cool realization to, you know, realize that the game was better than I probably gave it credit for at first blush. So yeah, keep an eye on it, see what happens when it turns into more of a game and less just a bare mechanic, good as it is. And I'd be curious to see where this goes on its road to 1.0. Anyway team, I might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.